Welcome to Ask Win, everyone. And I am so honored that this person actually said yes to my little podcast. And the reason why I say little podcast is because my podcast is now growing to the point of I can't believe. And so this month actually is Cerebral Palsy Awareness Month. The month of March is CP Awareness Month. And we may be doing something with my guest on the history of cerebral palsy. We're still working that out. But enough of me rambling. I'm going to let Miss Emily Prokop of The Story Behind take it away, and I'll be asking her baseline questions. And then I'm going to have her interview me and ask me a couple of questions.
All right. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks for having me on. I'm really happy to be here.
You are so welcome. So, okay, where did the vision of The Story Behind come from?
I've always been a trivia and history, well, kind of a history buff, history that interested me. So in school, I wasn't as good at history as you might think of somebody who would have a history podcast. So things like dates and wars and people, they just became a jumble in my head. But the things that did stick out were the tiny bits of trivia, like things like M&Ms became popular during World War II because they were able to be sent to soldiers because they wouldn't melt as easily. Things like that would get stuck in my head, but I couldn't tell you the dates of something like certain battles in war. But it was always a tiny trivia thing.
Yeah,
So I loved picking those up. And I also loved telling people about it. And it would always come up at the most inappropriate times. So at parties, when somebody would say something, it would trigger something in my brain that would connect it to, oh, do you know this piece of trivia? Or especially when I started listening to podcasts, and I became one of those people who would say, I heard on a podcast, da-da-da-da. And I never knew if that was always warmly acceptable in certain parties and in social groups. And my husband, it would drive my husband nuts sometimes because he's like, can I just tell a story without you giving all the trivia about everything I'm talking about? And so once my first podcast, the Classy Little Podcast, ended and I was still itching to do something with history and trivia, I decided to do a solo show. And it was actually when I was pregnant. And I had a craving for pink lemonade, like specifically pink lemonade. And I was at my old job at the time. And I went out and I got pink lemonade for my lunch. And I started looking at it and I was like, they don't make pink lemons, do they? And it just started this rabbit hole on Google of where pink lemonade came from.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
I got so interested in it. And I was like, I have no one to tell. I have nobody to tell about this. And so I thought I had that hole from not having a podcast, and I was like, that's it. This is my next podcast. I have way too many of these weird origin backstories in my head, and I'd love to get them out to be able to really research them because I love researching too. That's one of the funnest parts about doing my podcast. It's the most time intensive of spending 3 or 4 hours just doing research and then writing the episodes, but being able to get that story and put it together, it's always so interesting. And I always find out things that I've never heard of or even more things that I want to just tell everybody. But that's where podcasting comes in because I have that platform. Even though it feels like I'm talking to myself when I'm recording it, then I hear back from people saying, that's so interesting. I'm like, I know. Thank you. Thank you for listening and being my people and getting it.
Well, I hate to tell you guys, but I love Emily's podcast. I love a bunch of podcasts, but Emily's podcast is right up there. And she did a podcast on the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup, which almost made me go get one. And she said at the beginning of the podcast, she goes, this was recorded with my 6-year-old daughter sitting next to me. That going down the rabbit hole, which the 6-year-old wanted to eat Reese's peanut butter cups for breakfast. And I'm like, oh God. I'm like, oh God, here we go down that rabbit hole of feeding kids sugar for breakfast. And for those of you who don't know, I'm in education. So I hear, oh, Mommy gave me cereal for breakfast. But I have yet to hear Mommy gave me Reese's peanut butter cups. But that being said, it was one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, she gets a lot of protein for breakfast because I know if I give her sugar, she's just off the wall. So she gets eggs or oatmeal, or she gets a good amount of protein, or else she's just she does not get Reese's peanut butter unless it's a special occasion. Yeah. But.
Special occasions. But I thought I would throw that in there for those of you who go listen to the Reese's Peanut Butter podcast episode. Just know that we kind of had a child involved, and I don't think that happens very often, Emily. Does it? I don't know.
It depends on the episode. Sometimes, like I did the story behind clowns, and there was no way I was showing her the stuff I was looking up because it scared me. But and that was an audience request, and I didn't think they would go for it. And I made a joke. Oh, do you guys think I should do the history of clowns? And even though I'm really afraid of it, and they all just said yes. I was like, I thought you guys liked me. How dare you? But it ended up being really. And that's the thing, it ended up being so interesting. And I do love finding out just the history of things that I might not know or that I'm not aware of. And that's part of the fear factor, too, is once you learn something about a topic, you're not afraid of it anymore.
And I know, and I'm sorry, we're talking to a podcasting guy who actually recently lost her job. She was a journalism major and then went into finding the facts in crossword puzzles. Correct me if I'm wrong, Emily, but I think that's what you did for your day job.
Yeah, that was what I did. I was an editor for a crossword book company and a puzzle book company. And it was a lot of fun, and I liked the job a lot, but it was funny. Once I got into podcasting, I was so in love with it that I was distracted at work, definitely. Yeah. And it was a layoff, but I knew that if there were going to be layoffs at the company, that I would probably be up there because they could tell that my heart just wasn't in it anymore. I was listening to podcasts all the time, and I was toying with the idea of starting a podcast editing company, and so when it happened, it was kind of like, oh, okay, great, well, all
right. And then the funny thing is, she did a podcast episode on the history of the pink slip, and she goes, I listened to that episode as well, and like, what's going on here? And she said in that episode, this has something to do with me, and this has something to do with today's topic, trust me. But I'm like, you took your job layoff and made a podcast episode out of it. I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God. We have a obsessed podcaster.
It's true. And you'll talk to any podcaster, and you know in the back of their head, if you're having a conversation with them or if they're learning something, probably in the back of their head, they're thinking, how can I use this for my podcast? Or how can I make an episode of my podcast about this?
Yeah. Oops. So, Emily, what is your favorite book?
So my favorite book right now, I've had a few over the years, but it's funny because I was in journalism for so long and I was an editor for the majority of my career, is I don't really read books as much as other people just because my day job for so long was reading and editing, and I couldn't go home and keep doing it. My eyes just said no. And I found podcasts. I would listen to audiobooks sometimes, but for the most part I liked podcasts. But My favorite book right now, though, now that I'm no longer reading, and now reading is becoming fun again, I keep the book Daily Ohm by Madison Taylor on my bedside table, and it's one of those books where you don't have to read it from beginning to end. It's short passages about sort of every subject you can think of, but it's a different way to think about them. It's ideas to meditate on. It takes 5 seconds to read one passage, or 5 minutes to read one passage. It's like a page and a half for each one. And it'll deal with things like dealing with overwhelm, or even things like menstruation, stuff like that. Like, it gets very detailed, or dealing with phobias or fear, or anxiety. And sometimes I just flip open the book to whatever and I'll just read it. And somehow it will correlate with what I'm thinking. And the nice thing that I can do is I read it before bed, and I kind of close my eyes and I think about it as I'm falling asleep. And just the words, it's very calming, and it's a different way to look at it and keep everything in perspective, because when you're in a certain mindset, it's so easy to be completely consumed by it. So when I got the book, it was right when my layoff was happening, and I needed those few passages about closing doors, meaning opening windows from that. And everything bad, it's not necessarily bad, it's just a challenge. And once you get past that challenge, you're going to be stronger. And I needed to read things like that.
Yeah. When God closes window, high pound closing the window, they may open another door. In this case, they open another door. And for Emily doesn't know this, but you guys know, for the past year, I've been going back to journalism school, believe it or not. And God forbid, if I lose my day job, I'm going to fall back on podcasting and writing books, because once you fall in love with the medium, you guys, you will never turn it back. And people were asking me last night, I was at a birthday party for my assistant. It's March 5th when we record this. By the time it comes out, you guys will hear it on Tuesday. And so today's my assistant's birthday, so if you want to make a big deal of that, go ahead. But people were asking me, how do you do this podcast? I said, basically I do on-demand radio, because people don't have time to sit in front of YouTube or sit in front of a radio and listen. We are all so busy that we have time to stick a podcast in our ears, but that's about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I love about podcasts, is it is a very passive way of entertainment. You could be driving, you could be doing your dishes, you could be outside gardening, at the park, all this stuff, and you could still be learning, which is what I love. I love just absorbing information and doing it with a podcast. I used to have a commute of 2 hours every day, an hour there and an hour back, and I consumed so many podcasts, and anything that I wanted to learn, there was a podcast for. So I just became this avid learner through podcasts, and actually a lot of what I can say helped me build a business was stuff that I learned on podcasts. So I love that little thing that I have my podcasting business using podcasts.
I built my podcasting business using podcasts. And what is your favorite podcast? I know I'm asking you pick your favorite child questionnaire, but what is your favorite podcast?
I have to go back to the first one that I felt that made me fall in love with podcasts, and that was Good Job Brain. And it's a history and trivia podcast, and it came about at a difficult time in my life when I was getting a divorce, and I had just moved into an apartment, and I didn't have internet. I didn't have like my computer set up. I didn't have the TV. I didn't have the radio, but my iPhone just got this new update that came with a little purple app called Podcasts. And I said, well, what is this? Yeah, what is this? And I went and I looked and opened it up, and oh my God, there are just so many to choose from. How do I pick? And this bright orange logo came up under, I believe it was education. And it just said for trivia people. And I was like, well, I'm a trivia person. This looks good to get into. When I listened to that, the first episode, and I was hooked. I did all my unpacking in one night, just binge listening to this podcast. And it was just so amazing. And the thing was, it got me out of that headspace of being in a divorce, in a messy situation. And it took me away from that. And it made my brain work again. It wasn't just mush of emotions and, oh, what am I going to do? It was, oh, right. There's other stuff out there that I love learning about, that this is really interesting. It made me smile. The hosts are charismatic, and I connected with them, and I got to tell them. It was really nice one time. They went live on their Facebook group, and I got to tell them, you know, you guys got me through my divorce. The fact that you had 60 episodes at the time, and I binge listened to those during the worst weeks of my life, you guys did that for me, and I'll never be able to thank you enough. And when people make podcasts, they got together, they wanted to hang out and have fun and talk about trivia and history and little things like that, thinking they might entertain a few people. But, you know, when you hit somebody at the right time and you are exactly what they need, I mean, that's phenomenal. So anyone thinking of starting a podcast, even if you think, well, what do I have to say? Who's going to listen to me? You never know when you're going to come along, just the right person for just the right time. And the other thing is, until I was a podcaster, I never reached out to them. So you might not even know the listeners that you touch with your show, because not everyone reaches out. Until I was a podcaster, and I was like, oh yeah, people like to hear from their audience. They like to hear from their listeners. And that was when I finally reached out to them and told them.
Yes, they do. So my last question for all interview, and then you get to play interview on me, is if you had to be educated by anyone inside or outside your field or your previous field, who would it be and why?
Yeah. It's tough because I still think I'm still getting used to the business side. And one of my favorite people to follow is Landon Porter, and he's from the Facebook group Getting Clients Without Being Salesy, which sounds exactly up my alley because I don't do cold calling, I don't do cold emailing, and I just like forming those connections with people and then being able to sort of move that into business if I can, if I have the capacity to, but that's not my number one priority. So anyway, Landon made this Facebook group, and you join it, and he made what's called a treasure hunt, where you click on different things and you watch different videos, and he's like, here's how this Facebook group is different, and here's how you can apply all this stuff to businesses, and let's be done with the businesses of reaching out and trying to sell somebody as soon as you meet them. Why don't you go out and get to know people first before you're pitching it? And he does this sort of gross analogy of you wouldn't go to a party and just whip it out in front of everybody. You know, you go to a party and get to know people. And I love that approach. So I was lucky enough to have a business kind of strategy session with him where we picked each other's brains because he was thinking about podcasting. And he brought this perspective to my business of, I was telling him, you know, I'm in a business with a lot of friends who are technically competitors, and I feel weird in this space sometimes because a lot of these colleagues are people who I learned from. So they don't necessarily want to come out and be like, well, I now edit podcasts and I now do consulting, and I don't want them to think that I'm taking business from him. And Landon kind of assured me, he's like, look, it's okay. They're going to do business with who they like the best, and you don't have to compete for that. And you have to be okay with just letting people go to somebody if they connect with them more, because you're not going to want any clients who you don't line up with or who are going to think, well, I got her for a bargain because she's new, but I'd rather be working with somebody else who's more established, something like that. So just getting that perspective from him, he's a great guy to learn from.
He is. Now, Emily, you're going to have to surprise me because I have no idea what Emily's going to ask me. So take it away, Emily. You get to play interviewer on me.
Oh, okay. Well, I sent the questions over, but so one of my questions is, what do you want people to ask you? What are you waiting for somebody to ask you that maybe somebody hasn't asked you yet in an interview?
I'm waiting for people to ask me, where do I see this podcast in about a year? Not necessarily why did you start the podcast. People have asked me that 1,000 times over, and I'm quite frankly sick of that answer. And I want people to think about podcasting as a bigger vision thing. So where do I see my podcast, let's say, in the next year?
Okay, so where do you see your podcast in the next year?
Oh, gee. I knew that question was going to turn on me. Where do I see my podcast in the next year? Well, I am not as lucky as you, Missy, because the thing I'm about to bring up, you already did. Thank you very much. Thank you to a podcast here. I see myself with a publishing deal. And I'm not as lucky as Miss Emily here, because Miss Emily had a publisher approach her about turning the story behind into a book.
Yeah, that's another
so
thing that's
I
creeping
hope
up on me.
to get a book deal out of my books and this podcast. I hope to tell you guys that I got signed by agent and signed by a big publisher. I hope to step away from the independent publishing deal.
You know what? One of my clients does, I have to cough, excuse me. One of my clients actually does a podcast about self-publishing, and one of the things he was saying in one of his episodes was that there was an author who was so good at self-publishing that when the big publishing houses came to him, he would not have been as successful had he signed with them. So that's something to think about.
That's something to think about. Yes, you play devil's advocate here, Miss. I'm going to be a published author, and yes, of course, you play devil's advocate. Of course, I want to be as independent as I can, but it's expensive being independent as you can, and quite frankly, I want that extra support. I don't care about the expense. I care about the extra support. So that's where I want the publishing deal, and I hope to get that in the next 6 months.
That's great. That's a good goal to go for. So I had another question. I don't know if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs.
Oh, I looked at that question, and no, I haven't taken one. I probably should now. Now, in the next couple of weeks, I have to now research that one, because I have taken so many brain tests over the years due to my cerebral palsy that they have never given me a Myers-Briggs test. In all the testing they have done on my brain, they have never given me Myers-Briggs test ever. So now I have to do Googling, researching on that one. So no, but I promise you guys, I will be taking a Myers-Briggs test in the next couple of weeks there, because that's a good point. You would think they would give me a personality test along with all the other medical testing they have done on me over the years, lab that win. And I say that as a joke, lab that win here, but they have never given me a Myers-Briggs test, and I don't know that, and so I'm going to do that in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what they classify your personality as, just because
Yeah.
it tells you a lot about what kind of person you are and what kind of strengths you have. So it's not necessarily something they would do in a medical facility as far as testing your intelligence or testing this or that. It's more, when I took the test, I found out I was INTJ is the letters that I associate with Myers-Briggs. But the big thing is learning that I was an introvert as opposed to an extrovert, and not in the way of I like to stay indoors and away from people. It's more, this is where you get your energy from. I get my energy and my strength throughout the day from alone time and having that just peace and quiet away from all this stimulation and away from people. Whereas extroverts, like I'm taking a guess. I'm going to guess that you are an extrovert because you're so friendly and you're so open with people and you love listening to people and taking in everything they have to say and getting your energy from that. So something like you could go to a party all night and it would rev you up. You'd get home and you'd be ready to clean the house or something like that. Whereas I go to a party and after about 2 hours, I'm exhausted. I'm ready to go home and just sit in silence.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that's really
it's true. I may be an extrovert because it's true. Because I was at a party last night and I wanted to stay and talk pleasant with people I knew. So I wanted to stay and talk to the other people and get more stories out of them. But because of weather conditions, thank you very much, I had to leave early with other people. So, I'm truly an extrovert, you guys, when I think about it, but a Myers-Briggs test now would be a good thing for me to take.
Yeah, I'm really interested. So let me know when you take it, and I'd love to.
Yeah, I will. I will.
Yeah, because that's the thing is I'll meet somebody and ask if they've taken it, and it's such an awkward conversation to have. But I'm curious about how people work, and then it sort of makes me realize how I can interact with them and how I can connect, because certain people might have, there are 16 different combinations of letters. So if you have a certain letter, in common with somebody else, it's easy to find common ground to talk to them about. So my husband, I made him take the test as soon as I did. He was the same as I am. He is an INTJ as well. And so I'm like, well, of course you are. Like, that's why we get along. We can sit together in the same room and just not talk and be perfectly happy in that silence. And while other people, I used to be married to an extrovert, and he would come in from work and he'd turn on the TV and the radio and start asking me about my day, and I'd be like, oh my God, I can't, you're draining me just being here.
Yeah, just being here. Yeah, okay. So you guys, I have to now take the Myers-Briggs test. It probably won't be this week because I got too much stuff going on, but it will definitely be next week, before my 32nd birthday, which is in June. I'll probably take the day out of, the day I get out of my job, because I want to, I have a job review on Friday. Don't ask. Don't ask. They're, messing with me a little bit. So, I am going to be switching jobs yet again within my job, and hopefully I don't get fired, number one, and hopefully I get to use my strengths as a spokesperson and not necessarily an educator, because education is draining. Ugh. Education is draining. So, and that's what I've been doing since 2006 is education. So I hope that my job is able to sculpt a job for me, to use my strengths and talents in education. And that's all happening on Friday. So send good vibes my way on that one because
Oh, yeah.
right now my job is changing. It's been changing since I got the job. It's changing, growing. It's growing in scholastically, and it's growing building wise, and we're changing the campus. We started this changing the campus in 2010, and for those of my colleagues who listen to the podcast, they know what I'm talking about, and they, for those new colleagues who just started listening to my podcast, yes, we used to have a tiny campus, and I love that tiny campus, but unfortunately it got bigger and scarier. So, so that being said, we've been trying to do this move as slowly as possible. We're finally reaching the end of it, thank God. But I want to help them to the best of my abilities. So that being said, hopefully they can make a job for me where I can be a spokesperson, not necessarily a teacher, not because I don't love teaching. Teaching is just exhausting.
Yeah. And that's one of the great things about learning things. Like, there's not just the Myers-Briggs test. There's Enneagram, and there are all these personality tests. And some people, like my husband, kind of think they're frou-frou or whatever. But I think getting to know yourself and getting to know your strengths and becoming comfortable with them and being able to hone them not only helps you as a person and helping to sort of letting you be able to showcase your best qualities, but it also helps where you work and the people you work with because they know your strengths. You're able to tell them your strengths. Like at my old job, I ended up being really good at learning the computer software we were using, and then people would go to me instead of having to go to IT and having them just tell them, oh, we'll restart your computer, and I would sit there and be like, well, no, you could also do this and this, and they ended up using me for that sometimes. So even though that wasn't my job, but you get to know your strengths and you become a valuable asset to your job just by being able to showcase those.
Yeah, well, my wings may have to be taken small because I may have to tell my job what is going on there, even though they think I'm an extrovert, which is true. I just don't want to be stuck in a position where I am teaching for the rest of my life. To the day I die, I would rather be educating people on a bigger scale.
Right. And that stuff like your personality and your strengths can also change. So sometimes I'll take the test because I'll take it a few times just to see. And sometimes I'll be an INTJ, and then other times I'll be an INFP. And I swear these letters will make sense to you in a week or so but they'll change depending on what you're going through. And even though I could be introverted so much, there's still a level, you're not 100% one thing. So there's still a level of, I could sit at home all day and be perfectly happy, but every so often there'll be this nagging thing of, you should probably get out of the house. You should probably see somebody. You should probably talk to somebody other than your husband. Call somebody up on the phone and talk to somebody. So yeah, it's definitely, it's something that'll change and it's not static.
Nope, it's not static. Now, do you have any more other questions for me?
No, actually, I listened to a few episodes. I listened to the episode with Jamila Sufrant. She's actually one of my clients, my editing clients, and I love her. She's great.
Well,
and
she did. I can actually tell because she has a fantastic podcast, and you're the magic sauce behind it. And you actually gave me an editor's name who I'm happy on, saying I'm meeting with tomorrow morning to discuss my podcast. Unfortunately, Emily can't be the magic sauce to everyone's podcast. I wish he would. But
I know.
he honestly said, you guys, it takes too much time.
It does. And the other thing is, I've had requests to start a waiting list because once I get a new client, it takes me about 4 to 6 weeks just to work them into my schedule to a point where I can edit faster because, when you start something, you're very new and it takes me a while to get used to that client, to get used to their theme music, how they want it, and to go back and forth and tweak things with them. So I didn't want to start my business and be like, okay, I now have full-time capacity. Give me 5 people. It's like, no, I'm taking on people once a month at the most, I think. Yeah, once every 4 weeks or every 6 weeks. And then once I get used to them and I can incorporate them into my schedule, then I'm just like, okay, let me get back to this person who was looking for an editor before. And the thing is, I like keeping in contact with people, and I have a great group on Facebook that I'm part of, the podcast editors group. And one of the things that's great about that is if somebody is looking for an editor and they're not necessarily, they need somebody right away and I can't do that, I can go to that group and say, listen, is there anybody, this person has this kind of podcast, this is how long it is, this is what they're looking for. And there are some editors who will just take any job, but I really like connecting editors and clients that mesh well together, that I think would work well together, that I don't want to say, oh, just go to so-and-so big brand company that'll just take anybody, unless I know the person personally and I'm like, yeah, they can get along with anybody because there are those out there. Mm. But I do like being able to connect people with editors who are specific for their show. That's really nice. And I know some editors are starting to niche down and saying, I'm only taking on coaching shows or I'm only taking on finance shows. And it's really nice to see all the niches.
Yes, it is, but editing is one of those scary monsters that I should take on myself. In the next couple of weeks, I will take on myself. Don't ask how I'm doing it. But I am taking a podcasting class, and as part of this podcasting class, my big scary monster is now come to bite me in the butt. So basically, I have to now learn how to edit a podcast, and it's going to be my own. And so as soon as I get myself organized, which should be in next week, I'll be editing my podcast, but then someone is going to do the intros and outros for me because I can't do that. That's too much. So I applaud the editors out there. I applaud you, Emily, for taking it on and editing other people's podcasts because we all seem to not like the sound of our own voices, and I can't believe you edit your own podcast and now made a company out of it. Geez.
Well, my secret is speeding up my own voice so that I sound like a chipmunk because if I listen to myself at regular speed, I get annoyed with my own voice. But at a faster speed, I sound like a chipmunk and it sounds like somebody completely different. So.
So good. Well, where can people find you, and when does the infamous story behind the podcast book come out?
Yeah, the book is set to come out in September, October of 2018. So I have the next few months to get it done. It has to be done by June, and I really have to just sit down and rent a hotel room for about a week just to be able to get that headspace to do it and to do the majority of it. But so that's coming out then. There's going to be pre-ordering information probably on my website, and everything can be found over there at thestorybehindpodcast.com. And that includes my show and how to contact me. And then my company, if people are interested in learning more about podcast editing or consulting, is epodcastproductions.com.
Yeah. So now, and I presume the two sister sites are connected. in some way.
They are. They do link to each other, especially because I like using my podcast as kind of a calling card to, look, I'm not somebody who learned how to copy and paste in Audacity and now is saying that they're an editor. Not that I've known any editors like that, but just to say I have a podcast. I have been podcasting for a while. I have been in the space for 3 years. If not with my current show, but with my older show. And so being able to have that as sort of, oh, well, she has a podcast, so she must know what she's talking about a little bit, because there are people out there, and I'm sure you've run into them in the podcasting space, where they say, well, I know everything about social media, and they've read maybe one article from 2014 about podcasting and think they know, go ahead, go use FeedBurner, go use SoundCloud.
Oh, I knew you were going to say SoundCloud. And I'm like, yeah.
I know.
Yeah, don't go there. I was actually listening to a podcast this morning out of Australia, and podcasting still out of Australia, I think it's called, and they were saying which directories to put your podcast in. Well, one of the directories they said was iTunes. Do you know they didn't even mention Spotify? And I was shocked. I was like, yeah, okay, you're behind the times, and I almost unsubscribed. And I'm like, yeah, iTunes is great, but Spotify is even better because the lady in the tube can play Spotify, and I don't want to set ladies in the tube off, so that's why I'm not using their name. And so, yeah, I got that trick up my sleeve. But any podcast consumption we as podcasters can get is good for us. I mean, my Spotify stats are very slow, but they're growing. They're growing, and I know the story behind is in Spotify because that's how personally I get it. So I know the story behind is in Spotify, and yes, and so you have a Spotify fan goal of me listening to the story behind. Yay! So I think I should tell you that because I'm like, maybe she's interested in the Spotify stats. So and that's how I listen to a couple other podcasts in Spotify too.
I did not expect them to do as well as they've done, but I think at this point, on the last episode of the feed, they were 5%, 6% of podcast listening, and they were the second after Apple Podcasts / iTunes. That surprised me so much because I had Spotify for a long time, and then I switched to Google Play Music, and not for my podcast, but for music in general. And I was really surprised that Spotify did as well as it did.
Yeah, and by the way, she's talking about the feed is the official Lipson podcast, who we both host on. Lipson is a wonderful podcast host. If you guys want to go host a podcast or listen to a podcast, they are wonderful podcast hosts. The fact that they have their own podcast, I think, is phenomenal. So if you guys want to start a podcast, just go talk to Emily. She'll get you all set up. But she and I host on Lipson, and we're not paid to say this by any means, but Lipson has never let me down ever since I started my podcast. And I tried several different podcasts hosts, including Blogtalk Radio. That was a disaster and a half. And so, Lipson has never let me down. I don't know about Emily, but Lipson is one of those standards. They know what they're doing, and they keep doing it, and they keep grooving every so often.
Yeah, I've never had a problem with Libsyn, and the few times I've had to reach out to them, I've gotten amazing support. They have a great support team over there.
Yeah.
They have Dave Jackson and Elsie. Oh my God, Elsie is just the best. Even if you're not hosting with Libsyn, get to know Elsie Escobar. She's wonderful.
Yes, She Podcast, by the way. She Podcast. That's Elsie Escobar and Jessica Kupferman. And joining on my favorite podcasting hosting, and I'm joining on my favorite podcasting because I'm just a fangirl, and not only a fangirl of Emily. Trust me, I like my other podcast too, but when I'm really into history podcasts, I just need something to listen to. I tend to take the story behind because I'll always learn something off the story behind, and I'm not just saying that because I'm interviewing the Emily Prokop here, but if you guys want a history podcast and want a short history podcast, Emily does a really great job.
Oh, thank you, Wynn. That's so sweet of you.
Well, no, I am just curious. So how many minutes is a typical story behind podcast? Edited, of course.
Edited. Oh, well, it's funny because I said earlier that it takes 3 hours or 4 hours to research, but a typical episode is anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes. And when you just have to talk, when it's just you talking, it sounds like it would be so long. And the first time I wrote an episode, I was like, this is 5 pages. It's going to take, oh man, this is going to be about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Nope. It took 9 minutes for the whole thing because it was just me talking. There wasn't that conversation going on. It was very straight to the point. And once I got it to that short amount of time, I couldn't believe, are people going to listen to this? It's so short. And then I would hear from people, oh, it's great because when I want to run to the supermarket, it's easy enough to put on an episode because it takes me that long to go. Or when they want to do something that will take a while, take a little bit of time, but they don't want to do it, something like cleaning the toilet or something like that. And they just want something to listen to that'll fill that time. That's not going to leave them sitting in their driveway when they get back from the grocery store or trying to do something else while they're still listening to a podcast. Having that short podcast and being one of the few that I was aware of that, most of my friends have longer podcasts, and being one of those first few, it was really nice. And plus the fact that people can binge basically my whole catalog in maybe 2 days at the most. Because I've heard that too, is they find me and they're like, oh, well, she's on episode 104. What am I going to do? That's a lot of episodes to listen to. And then they start and it's like Pringles, I guess.
It's addictive. It's addictive. God, talk about the peanut butter cup. Your podcast is like the peanut butter cup is addictive. Oh my God. Once you start down the rabbit hole of Emily Prokop's podcast, you are going to be like, what did I immerse myself in? So be careful. Be careful, you guys. That's my fair warning. Be careful, you guys, when you start listening to Miss Emily, because she's so good at it. And I'm not just saying that because she's on my podcast. Trust me, you guys. I binge a lot of podcasts, but she's one of my top favorites. But be careful as to how many podcasts you're listening to unheard, because then you become trivia nuts, and other people don't want to hang out with you.
Nope. And then you'll have to start your own podcast just to be able to talk about all the trivia.
Yes, exactly. No, the problem with trivia is like, where are we going there? Going down a rabbit hole which no one else cares about. So I want to thank Emily for taking the time out of her busy schedule and coming on the podcast. And as I said, at the top of this podcast interview, we might be working on a podcast episode of the history of cerebral palsy, which Emily has already told me she's done a couple minutes of research on. So I can't wait to hear that, considering I gave her that idea. I'm like, how is she going to take this idea? She took it and ran with it, of course. But, and she does take audience requests on her Twitter feed, which is the story behind Pod. So if you guys have an audience request, depending how much time she has, she can do it. And she cites her sources, so you guys can go find more information at the end of the episodes of her podcast. She's a very well-known journalist to cite her sources. So again, I would like to thank Emily for coming on my podcast, and I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast episode, and I hope you guys go find the story behind and then listening to the story behind. You just have to be careful how much content you consume on the story behind, because I don't want people to say that I gave them too much content. Now consume. I don't feel me guilty to that. What I'm like, I bring you these podcasts on, but I happen to bring a history buff on. So that's okay. I just don't want to hear, and Emily doesn't want to hear, people don't want to hang out with me because I consume your podcast. So now I'm regurgitating everything you told me on your podcast. Oops. So I want to thank Emily, and I hope that she has a terrific day. And you guys, too, you guys will be hearing this episode on Tuesday, March 6th, and we will see what happens with my job and the story behind. And next week, I will give you guys a solid update as to what's happening with my job. And hopefully during the month of March, you guys will hear the history side of cerebral palsy on the story behind, which I don't know, we haven't necessarily talked about that. So hopefully Emily wants to run with that idea, but I thank her for her time this morning, and I know she has to get back to editing and doing all that good stuff. So I thank you guys for listening, and this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you. And thank you guys for all your support. And please, 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 please share the story behind out. Please share our win out so we can make those communities bigger and join forces and follow Emily on Twitter. Emily, where are you on Twitter?
On Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, I'm at StoryBehindPod, or if you want to follow more of podcasting stuff, you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Emily Peck Prokop.
Okay. And then on Twitter, you guys, I'm at Win Kelly, Kelly Charles, and the moment this story behind cerebral palsy episode comes out, yes, I will be retweeting that so you guys can see that my vision came true. Thank you, Miss Story Behind. But hopefully that will work out. I don't know. Emily ran with my idea and she tweeted me back, and so we're working on it. We're working on it, you guys. Emily just has to decide what takes top priority right now. Because she's a huge history buff.
Yeah, that's the tough part is once I started the business, and also I had a son 10 months ago, so all that stuff, my podcast sort of took a back seat for a while, but it's nice to be getting back into the groove, and hopefully doing more and getting more ahead. Plus, it's content for my book, so I really have to get on it and do stuff.
Yes, 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 you do. And so I hope you guys enjoyed another fabulous episode, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow when you listen to this episode, and then I'll catch you guys on Thursday with another episode. But for now, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode with Emily. Thanks, you guys.
You all set? Uh-oh. Did I lose you? Okay. Are we good? I'm guessing we're good. All right, Wynn. If you can still hear me, I'm going to head off. Thank you so much again. All right. And you have a great Monday.